Galindos is a farm located at a distance of 3 kilometers in the direction northwest of the small town of Paradas, and 50 kilometers east of the province of Seville, Spain. Until the end of the 19th century, these lands belonged to the church, after which various wealthy families became owners of the lands. Although this farm was far from the largest in the area, in 1975 it was very attractive to potential buyers. 400 hectares of agricultural land, a large two-story country house with a spacious courtyard, and a smaller house for servants. In addition, there were several garages and stables on the farm, as well as a workshop equipped with all the necessary equipment for repairing cars, trucks, and tractors. The Los Galindos farm has recently added scales for heavy machinery, a loading dock, and even an underground tank for diesel fuel. Cotton, olives, and beets were grown on the farm. The last person who purchased the Los Galindos farm, before the mystical events, which will be discussed later. In 1950th year, there was a young man who was about 20 years old. His name was Francisco Delgado Duran. His parents were among the most famous and richest people in Madrid, and he earned a decent fortune working for his parents as their representative. In February 1969 year, Delgado died in Portugal as a result of a car accident. After his death, Francisco's sister inherited Los Galindos. It is worth noting that shortly after that she married the Marquis, Gonzalo Fernandez de Caradobo. The Marquis was a very respected man due to the status of his family. He was also known for his poor financial situation, due to his passion for gambling. Fernandez managed to maintain his vibrant lifestyle due to the fact that he continued to communicate with the richest people of that time, and sought friends among the most prominent members of society. Owning the Los Galindos farm thanks to his wife, Fernandez hired his friend Manuel Zapata as a manager in 1975. Zapata was 59 years old. He was a tough and harsh man who, apparently, had no sense of humor at all. Zapata was born in the city of Badajoz, served for a long time in the Spanish Legion, and even after retirement, he maintained army punctuality and discipline in everything he dealt with. He demanded the same from the people under his command. Everyone in Paradas described him as a very unpleasant boss. His wife of 53 years, Juana Martin, was originally from the city of Huelva, but lived most of her life in Paradas. Her parents and grandparents have worked in Los Galindos all their lives. In July of 1975, Los Galindos employed several workers who performed their work under strict supervision. Besides them, there was a 27-year-old Jose Gonzalez tractor driver. With a height of 160 centimeters and a weight of 56 kilograms, Gonzalez was a meek, and at the same time unreliable employee. He always wore thin-rimmed glasses. Because of his constant insecurity, everyone thought that he would never meet a woman who wanted to marry him. However, 7 months earlier, he had married 34-year-old Asuncion Peralta. She lived in Paradas, worked for a short time in Los Galindos during the harvest. Asuncion had been dating a local flamenco singer for a long time, but when they broke up, she was already over 30. She was single and without children. Therefore, when Gonzalez asked her to get married, she agreed, considering this marriage her last opportunity to have children. In July 1975, Asuncion was 6 months pregnant. 40-year-old Ramon Perilla was a regular employee of Los Galindos. A hard-working man, very kind and gentle. Many people remembered him like that, because he was one of the few people who could get warm feelings from Zapata. Sometimes he and Zapata could sit down and have a friendly conversation. No one could say anything bad about Perilla. Around 6 o'clock on the 22nd of July, 1975, Jose Gonzalez approached 36-year-old Antonio Fennett, a worker who had worked on the farm for many years. The shy tractor driver looked gloomy. Fennett didn't ask what happened, but he had a hunch. Recently, Zapata spoke very sharply about the rather careless course of repair of the baler press, which the tractor driver was engaged in the workshop. It was logical to assume that Zapata scolded Gonzalez again, and this affected his mood. Unfortunately, this was not uncommon. Gonzalez delivered a message from Zapata. Fennett was supposed to gather a group of people and go to the Los Galindos Olive Garden, where they would have to clean up weeds by the end of the day. Hearing this, Fennett raised his eyebrows in surprise. Weed control was not a rare activity on the farm, as on other neighboring farms. But this work was not part of Fennett's responsibilities. Besides, why did Zapata send Gonzalez to deliver this message? After all, the senior always gave orders personally. Then he didn't attach much importance to it. Just a small variety of daily activities. He will attach importance to this only after 8 hours. Ramon Perillo was nearby. Through Gonzalez, he asked Zapata to take a day trip to the nearby Los Hermana farm. This farm was located 4 kilometers north of Gali's Island, and there was a spring on this farm. There he wanted to collect water for Los Galindos. Fenn picked up the necessary tools from a shed nearby and rode his small motorcycle to the place of work in the Olive Garden. Only Zapata, his wife Juana, and Gonzalez remained on the farm. Later, at about 15 o'clock, several people in Parados observed truly strange things. The beige garden of 600 raced along the main street of the town. Apparently, he turned off the road that led to the Los Galindos farm. Many said that this car belonged to Jose Gonzalez. Eyewitnesses were struck by the following things. The first one, at this time, Gonzalez should be at work on the farm. And the second, the car was moving at an insanely high speed. Considering that Gonzalez had poor eyesight, as well as the fact that he was a very shy guy, all this was especially strange. Where was Gonzalez going? And why was he in such a hurry? Those of the witnesses who knew him personally were still asking these questions when at 15:15 they saw Gonzalez's car again, which this time was going even faster. Now he was heading back to Los Galindos. And he wasn't alone in the car. His wife, Asuncion, was sitting in the passenger seat. She was dressed elegantly. Later, some witnesses will report that she was dressed as if she was going to church on Sunday. This detail made the whole situation even more strange. Among the witnesses of what was happening was a friend of Asuncion, who will later provide more detailed information. She saw the couple leaving the house and getting into the car. She also mentioned another detail that caught her attention: the expression on their faces. According to this witness, both Gonzalez and his wife looked very excited and even scared. Under the scorching July sun, Fennett was riding his motorcycle back to Los Galindos. He had only 2.5 kilometers to cover. His only dream was to take a shower as soon as he got home, and maybe have a cold beer. It was especially hot that day. Before going to the orchard, Fennett looked at the thermometer located on the front wall of the house. 49 degrees. Later, the 22nd of July 1975 year is recognized as the hottest day of the year, when suddenly he stops the motorcycle and looks in the direction of Los Galindos. A column of black smoke is coming from the farm. Whoever wants to light a fire there, Zapata will tear off his balls. Fennett mutters to himself. No one dared to break the rules of Zapata. The old man didn't like to joke, especially at work. Fennett thought that the fire could have been caused by the terrible heat and drought that day. The air was dry, and the farm was full of hay. Frightened by his assumption, Fennett headed for Los Galindos at full speed. Having stopped his motorcycle at the main gate, his heart begins to beat faster. A huge pile of hay is burning under one of the canopies, but that's not what's going to scare Fennett. There is a strong smell of diesel fuel coming from the fire. Some other smell is mixed with this one. More subtle. He can't identify it, but the smell is nauseating. And where is Zapata himself? It was hard to believe that this strict man allowed a fire to happen. He had to be there, swearing loudly, and doing everything possible to extinguish the fire. But Zapata is not there. Gonzalez isn't there either. And this is doubly strange. It seems that there is no one on the farm at all. What happened? Where did everyone go? In addition to the crackling of fire, you can also hear the chirping of cicadas. He called for Pata, shouted. Then he called his wife Juana, and then Gonzalez, whose car was parked at the gate. There was no response. The farm seemed deserted. Fennett is scared. While he was gone, something happened. Something terrible. Unable to understand what has happened, Fennett begins to enter and exit the gate. He has no idea what to do. Should we put out the fire first? Or should he find the other employees? Maybe get on a motorcycle and go to Parados to notify the firefighters and the police. Then he looks around and sees other workers heading towards the farm. They are as surprised as Fennett. He waves his hands, calling them to come over, and exhales with relief, realizing that he is not alone in the midst of all this horror. The workers throw all their strength into eliminating the fire, which, in the end, is not in vain. The fire manages to be brought under control, after which someone accidentally discovers a terrible find in Zapata's house. Fennett's nausea is getting worse, and now he understands what caused it and was the source of a disgusting smell that he had not noticed before. There were only a few officers in the Civil Guard Department of Parados that evening. They had a short coffee break. One of them was Corporal Raul Fernandez, who was put in charge that day. Although he was responsible and diligent, Fernandez was still quite inexperienced due to his age. With a population of less than 10,000 people, Parados was one of those towns where life flows smoothly, peacefully, and sometimes even boring. Parados was the perfect place for a young officer to serve before he had more responsibilities. The daily routine at the station was disrupted in the most shocking way. A man burst in, panting and asking for help. Approaching him, Corporal Fernandez noticed that the man was scared to death. This man's name was Antonio Fennett. He rushed over on his motorcycle and claimed to be a worker at the Los Galindos farm. According to his statement, on the verge of hysteria, it became clear that something sinister had happened on the farm. Galindez's hair fire, traces of blood. Please help. Such were Fennett's words. Before Fernandez tried to calm him down to get more accurate information. Fennett said there were no wounded or dead to be seen at the scene, just fire and blood. The scenario described by the farmer was quite disturbing. The corporal asked the radio operator to find out if anyone from Los Galindos was admitted to the hospital in Seville that day. The police hoped that there had been an accident on the farm, but it turned out that everything was much worse. Corporal Fernandez and his subordinate jumped into a patrol Land Rover and headed for Los Galindos, turning on the sirens. They learned from the radio station in the car that there were no accidents in Los that day. Upon arrival, officers saw many farm workers who continued to fight small fires. The fire was no longer a problem, but that bloody trail, given that there were no calls to the hospital, did not bode well. Corporal Fernandez investigated the scene. A long line of blood drops began in the workshop, went through the yard, and ended at the door of the manager's house. This sight in itself was quite terrifying. But the fear increased when the officers discovered that the door was locked from the inside. It didn't look like the wounded people had entered the house and closed up. The thought flashed through Corporal Fernandez's mind. What if there's a killer inside, and he's waiting for us? He took his 9mm pistol out of its holster and ordered everyone to move away from the door. Taking a deep breath, the corporal hit the door with all his might. The lock broke and the door swung open. Inside was a trembling and frightened little dog. This dog belonged to Zapata. Her legs and stomach were covered in blood, but the dog didn't look injured. After the officers managed to get the dog out, they entered the house. There was even more blood on the floor. The corridor of the house resembled the letter G, so the officers took care to secure the corners in case someone was waiting for them there. The shooter was not there, but what the officers saw there will be their nightmares for many years. There was a much larger and thicker trail of blood on the floor, right next to the chair. It even looked more like a puddle. There was no doubt that the man whose blood was on the floor was already dead. It looked as if the victim was lying there, and then she was dragged to a room, the door to which was closed. Officers noticed that in the middle of the way, the greasy trail turned into a few rare drops of blood. But why? They soon got the answer to this question. Just at that moment, the officers were approaching the closed door, holding their weapons at the ready. The door to the manager's bedroom seemed to be not only closed, but also propped up by something heavy. The frightened but determined corporal fired 3 shots at the lock, and then, holding the pistol in front of him, knocked the door down again. What he saw next, he will remember for a long time. Inside there were 2 beds parallel to each other, but on one of them the mattress was rolled up. Blankets lay on the floor between the beds. On the blankets, face up, lay the body of a woman. Her face was disfigured. She was beaten on it with such force that the structure of the skull completely collapsed, which made it look like a flat rubber mask. Her skull was crushed. It was the body of Juana Martin, Zapata's wives. On one of the beds lay the alleged murder weapon, a knotter from a hay baler. He was covered in blood. There was no one else in the house, and the officers wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. After all, before that, the main part of their work was the settlement of banal domestic conflicts and disputes. A murder case, especially one so brutal, was something beyond them. They left the house full of confidence that there was no one else there. It was time to report on the radio station about the terrifying find. Unfortunately, this nightmare was still far from over. A terrible thought occurred to the corporal. He had already smelled the terrible smell coming from the fire. But if the dead woman was lying in the house, what? Or who was burning there? Was there another body on the farm? Not one, but 2 bodies were found when officers and farm workers finished extinguishing the fire in the barn. The bodies were so badly charred that they looked like little mannequins. One of them had his head cut off, the other had a leg. Later, a forensic medical examination will establish their identities. Jose Gonzalez and his wife Asuncion Peralta. They were also beaten to death. Around the time the burned bodies were found, something else was reported. There was another, thinner trail of blood at the main gate. Following this trail, the officers came to a small pile of hay, which was lying on one of the roadsides, not far from the central gate. Under this hay was the body of Ramon Parilla. His forearms were completely shattered. Apparently, he tried to cover his body with his hands when he was shot from a hunting rifle. Early from the shots and caused death. With information received from Fennett and other workers, Corporal Fernandez and his subordinates combed the Los Galindos neighborhood. Zapata, the manager. He had to be somewhere nearby. But they didn't find him. No more bodies were found that day. Gonzalez's car was investigated. Officers found Zapata's hunting rifle in the back seat. The gun was broken in half. Meanwhile, the manager could not be found. And all attempts to contact him and establish his whereabouts were in vain. Shortly after the officers assessed the scale of the incident, Corporal Fernandez requested reinforcements. Bodies. The manager is missing. The conclusion was obvious. The killer was Zapata. From the very beginning, the civil guard did not take the situation seriously. Zapata was a member of the Spanish Legion for over 20 years. He was trained to use various weapons, studied hand-to-hand combat techniques and combat strategies. Although he was almost 60 years old, the West was in good shape, and he was feared in Parados. He had a reputation as a man who never ran away from conflicts, if necessary, could use cruelty. It was as if, for some unknown reason, he had suffered shocking moments in his life. A warrant for his arrest was issued at night. Almost all residents of the city locked the doors of their houses and closed the windows before going to bed. Many also took out their hunting rifles and put them next to the beds. The farm and the surrounding land have been thoroughly inspected. In Parados, many members of the civil guard, as well as investigators who arrived from Seville, interrogated hundreds of people, trying not to miss a single detail. The last movements of each of the 4 victims were carefully studied. But it didn't do much good. Could it be that Zapata killed all these people, including his wife, in a fit of rage? Maybe he's hiding somewhere, armed and very dangerous. From the very beginning of the investigation into the Los Galindos farm massacre, Corporal Fernandez had no experience in investigating murders at all, and he was stunned by this situation. He did not unhook the perimeter of the crime scene, so anyone could safely move around the farm. As a result, for example, the nodder used to kill Juana Martin was picked up and moved by many people. But the strangest negligence occurred on the night of the 22nd of July. The Marquis, the owner of Los Galindos farm, was spending the night in the house at the time. And it was very strange because he rarely spent the night there. That night, he asked the civil guard for permission to spend the night on his farm. Later, those officers who speak out against his wishes get into trouble. In 1975, the dictator Francisco Franco's political regime was already disintegrating. But the old policy was still functioning. The Marquis came from a highly respected military family, so he had many friends among the officers of the civil guard. On the morning of the 25th of July, searches were still taking place in Los Galindos. Although it was clear that many of the evidence had been irretrievably lost, Zapata's dog was still in the house. She was constantly running out into the street, then returning to the house again. Some began to notice that it was as if the dog was running to the same place all the time. That morning, she ran away and started howling, which attracted everyone's attention. This place was right behind the farmhouse. There was a tree growing not far from the wall. The dog was barking and howling at a pile of hay nearby. The officers removed this hay. What they saw left them speechless. Face down, already decently decomposed, lay the body of Manuel Zapata, the farm manager, who at that very moment ceased to be the main suspect. His skull was deformed. He died from a blow to the head, caused by a blunt object. The condition of his body left no doubt. He died no later than the 22nd of July. A forensic examination would later confirm twice that he was the first person to be killed that day at the farm. On the same morning, a mysterious message appeared, written in blood on the wall of the house, which, translated from Spanish, read, "5 people were killed here." Who wrote this? When was this inscription made and why? No one could believe this turn of events. The farmhouse was thoroughly searched for 3 days. On the 23rd of July, one of the officers urinated on that very tree without noticing anything. Did the real killer, meanwhile, hide Zapata's body only to move it on the night of July 25th? And also choose the time to write a message in blood while no one sees him? Then the investigation began. It was then that really mysterious and truly inexplicable things began to happen. Why did the Marquis decide to stay in the house the night after the murders were committed? After all, first of all, the Marquis very rarely visited Los Galindos after he got the farm 7 years ago, and he spent even less time there at night. However, he demanded to be allowed to stay on the farm the night after the murders. As a result, his stay there was delayed until the discovery of Zapata's body. Secondly, suspicion is aroused by the property manager and the right-hand man of the Marquis Antonio Gutierrez Martin. Before that ill-fated day, he came to the farm only on weekends for a cursory assessment of the property, as well as to resolve issues that arose during the week. However, many of the farm workers during the investigation reported that they saw Gutierrez drive his Mercedes to Los Galindos. On the morning of the 22nd of July, it was Tuesday. It was a few hours before the fire and the murders. Some witnesses reported that he was looking for Zapata, whom no one could find in the morning. Thirdly, Gutierrez stayed overnight at the farm the night after the murders were committed with the Marquis. This has never been observed before. Fourth, the Marquis somehow managed to reduce the police presence to a minimum. Namely, at night, before Zapata's body was found, and a mysterious inscription appeared on the wall of the house. Only 2 guard officers guarded the access road to Los Galindos. That is, these 2 were about 800 meters from the farm in conditions of absolute darkness. Just 2 officers to guard, and then the discovery of 2 monstrous finds at once. Conclusions come to mind by themselves. Why the Marquis acted in this way has remained a mystery. On the other hand, Zapata also behaved very strangely that morning. Many neighbors claimed that he was in paradise and looked nervous and distraught. The fact that many farm workers, including Fennett, saw the foreman leave in the morning confirmed the veracity of these statements. It was not unusual for Zapata to leave the farm and go to paradise. But the fact that he was upset, in contrast to his arrogant and rude behavior, was clearly abnormal. What was he looking for in paradise, and what was he afraid of? Nobody knows. Finally, on the Mercedes that Gutierrez brought to Los Galindos with a gun in the morning, traces of these very guns were found. This Mercedes belonged to the Marquis. The Marquis himself came to the funeral of the victims in a Renault 4L belonging to Gutierrez. I wonder why they suddenly decided to swap cars. Now let's look at the autopsy reports of all 5 victims. This is important in order to capture the whole essence of the disagreements that will arise in the future. Manuel Zapata has 2 skull injuries inflicted from behind. In addition, during the autopsy of the body, a horizontal line of wounds running along the upper back was found. These wounds were very deep. It is believed that they were inflicted with a pitchfork after receiving head injuries and the death of the victim. Juana Martin fatal head injury caused by a blunt object. The blow was also struck from behind. The complete destruction of her bony facial structure indicates that the killer beat her with great force a large number of times. These blows were unnecessary, were inflicted after death, and were very cruel. Jose Gonzalez had a leg missing from his charred remains. She was found at the scene of the murder, and was also cut on other limbs. There was also a blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. Most likely, the cause of death was precisely this head injury. Asuncion Peralta, like her husband. A head injury resulting from a blunt force blow from behind was revealed on her charred remains. The head was separated from the body. Most likely, the cause of death was a head injury. Ramon was floating. Open and fragmented fractures of the ulna and radius of both forearms, resulting from a shot from a hunting rifle at close range. Critical damage to most organs, which led to the death of the victim, was received as a result of a shot in the chest from a hunting rifle. Until July 25th, police and investigators believed that Zapata was the main suspect in the murders. Of course, after all these murders and his disappearance, the investigators had no choice but to think anything else. Now it has become clear that 5 people were killed in 2 different ways and without apparent motives. After all, the first one, nothing of value was missing from their property, so there was no motive for theft. Second, none of the women had been raped, meaning there was no sexual motive. And the third, none of the victims participated in either political or public life. What happened then? It seems that the civil guard was working under some kind of pressure, because on August 16th, just 3 weeks after the murders were committed, it was announced to the public that the most likely version had been found, and the police had the name of the alleged killer. Jose Gonzalez Jimenez is a skinny, short and shy tractor driver who was also found dead, along with 4 other victims. This news shocked Parados and nearby towns. No one could believe it. Why did Gonzalez kill 4 people and then commit suicide? However, the police presented this version in such a light that the locals took it for quite wealthy, especially those who knew Gonzalez personally. Let's look at a couple of incidents in which he participated. It should be recalled that Gonzalez was an insecure person, and he lacked the courage to stand up for himself. His puny body and poor eyesight made him the object of a lot of ridicule and abuse from his boss. Zapata? A very sensitive young man. Gonzalez. He was described as a man unable to communicate with girls, which is why they refused to meet with him. All this only aggravated the situation and increased the number of jokes and mockery against him from some colleagues. From the first day of his work in Los Galindos, Zapata identified Gonzalez as a scapegoat, on whom he could vent all his anger and frustration. Reportedly, Gonzalez resigned himself to this attitude, never raised his voice, and did not say anything in response. Although after such incidents, he was often noticed sad and gloomy. But that wasn't the worst part. 2 years earlier, in 1973, one of Zapata's daughters had spent the summer in Los Galindos. She was a very attractive girl. She was in her 20s. She attracted the attention of all the young men on the farm. Among them, of course, was Gonzalez. Apparently, Gonzalez was in contact with the daughter of the West throughout the summer. And one evening, he overcame his excitement and asked her out on a date. Zapata's daughter was flattered by this invitation, but politely declined. Gonzalez, of course, was very disappointed by her refusal, but he survived it and continued his normal life. 3 days later, Zapata went to the workshop where Gonzalez worked. Zapata was furious, more than usual. Somehow, he found out about this short-lived relationship between his daughter and Gonzalez. Although it was very difficult to call it a relationship, he didn't like it very much. Zapata did not consider Gonzalez worthy of his daughter. It is reported that Gonzalez was so shocked by his words that he quietly cried. Shortly after that, Zapata's daughter came back to Parados. Her wedding was celebrated here. She was marrying an officer of the Civil Guard, who, of course, received approval for the Pats. Like many others, Gonzalez was invited to the wedding. He reportedly looked upset. After all, he saw everyone around him finding a mate, while Gonzalez seemed to be lonely all his life. The Marquis briefly sat down with him during the wedding, and, patting him on the back, "The next wedding we will celebrate will be your Jose. I promise." Those who witnessed this conversation could not definitely say. The Marquis is serious or sarcastic. Then, after the wedding of Gonzalez and Asen's son in December of 1974, new rumors began to spread among the farm workers. Gonzalez and Asuncion first met when she was temporarily working on a farm. Asuncion worked at Los Galindos for 2 seasons, although she was hired as a temporero. Temporero is a Spanish term for agricultural workers who work for a short period of time, for example, during harvesting. It is not completely clear what was part of her duties. It was rumored that she spent a lot of time with the Marquis on the rare occasions when he visited the farm. During the 2nd season of her work, she and Gonzalez had already met. According to many employees, Gonzalez expressed concern about the fact that Asuncion was considered an attractive woman, and the Marquis had a reputation for not having high moral principles. Thus, according to investigators, it was logical to assume that Gonzalez had accumulated a lot of anger and resentment in his soul. Some said that a few months before the massacre, Gonzalez appeared to have lost his head a little. He still did not contradict Zapata after his many insults. But now he no longer tried to hide his hostility towards the manager. Now, instead of tears, Gonzalez was often seen with a frowning face. According to the official version provided by the Civil Guard, on July 13, 1970, Gonzalez was in the workshop repairing a broken baler. Zapata thought Gonzalez had been doing it for too long. He has accused the tractor driver many times that he is a terrible slacker. Zapata went to the workshop and scolded Gonzalez, who was holding a knotter in his hands at that moment. Finally, when the manager turned to leave, Gonzalez succumbed to a fit of uncontrollable anger, which was the result of years of insults, bullying and humiliation, as well as a possible affair between his wife and the Marquis. Gonzalez held the knotter tightly, attacked Zapata, and hit him in the back of the head with all his might. Zapata immediately fell to the floor but was still alive. Then Gonzalez struck another blow to Zapata's head. Deadly this time. The realization that he had just committed a murder forced Gonzalez to return to his normal state. However, he decided that he could not leave any witnesses. Fearing the consequences, he dragged the body from the west to the border of the farm plot and hid it under the hay. After that, he went to the manager's house and with the same tool, a knotter, killed Juana, Zapata's wife. After a while, he saw Perilla, a regular farm worker, approaching the house. Gonzalez took the rifle with a Zapata and hid in the workshop. As soon as Perilla reached the end of the courtyard, Gonzalez came out of the workshop and shot him. Perilla managed to instinctively raise his hands. As a result, the shot did not hit the body, but it severely damaged his forearm. Experiencing excruciating pain, but fearing for his life, Perilla ran to the manager's house. When he realized that his door was locked, he rushed to the main gate. Gonzalez followed him. He couldn't run far because of the shock, pain and blood loss, and eventually fell to the ground. Gonzalez came up to him, rested the rifles on his chest, and pulled the trigger. Suspicion and jealousy could have caused the murder of his wife. He went to Paradas and found Asuncion there. He made up some excuse to convince her to go with him. After all, Asuncion was not going to go to the farm because she was elegantly dressed. When he returned to Los Galindos, he could tell his wife that Juana was ill or that she had had an accident. Therefore, she needs first aid before Gonzalez takes her to the hospital. When Asuncion bent down to check Juana's condition, Gonzalez struck her the same blow as for the party and Juana herself, thereby killing his own wife. Asuncion's blood was found in the same place where Juana's body was located. Gonzalez had nothing to lose, so he dragged the body across the yard, leaving a bloody trail. Returning to the workshop, he took some diesel fuel matches and then set fire to a pile of hay after all this. According to the official version, Gonzalez either accidentally fell into the fire or deliberately jumped into it to die next to his wife. It is clear why the version of Gonzalez's involvement in the murders was, to put it mildly, weak. Even a cursory glance at the injuries and circumstances of the victims' deaths ruins the entire official version. For example, if Gonzalez hit Zapata in the workshop, why was there no blood splatter? After all, there were many of them in Zapata's house where his wife was killed. If he dragged Zapata's body across the farm, then why is there no blood trail? There were no bloody traces in this direction at all, although Zapata's bleeding was very strong. How does a blow to Zapata with a pitchfork fit into this version? Why was it necessary to beat Juana with terrible force after her death? From the very beginning, it was noticed that the thick trail of blood left by Juana's body suddenly stopped in the middle of the corridor, turning into a few rare drops. The civil guard officers explained this by saying that at that point Gonzalez picked up Juana's body and carried it on himself, instead of just dragging it. And now let's think about whether Gonzalez, who weighed 56 kilograms, could carry the body of a 70-kilogram Juana. Why separate Asuncion's head from her body? Why was Gonzalez's own leg cut off? And where did the rest of the cuts on his body come from? Why would he have to do this to himself before committing suicide? As mentioned earlier, there were traces of serious trauma on Gonzalez's skull. Where could they have come from if he committed all the murders himself? Why hide the bodies of the salary and the steam room and set fire to the body of his wife if you're going to commit suicide? Then why did Juana's body remain where she was killed? No matter how improbable this version may seem, the civil guard accepted it, despite the large number of holes and inconsistencies in it. However, the criminal case was not closed until 1983, until a new investigation was launched. Then in September, the Marquis amazed everyone by telling his version of what could have happened that hellish evening in Los Galindos. First, he stated that Gonzalez was not involved in the murders at all. Instead, he told how, shortly before the murders were committed, he allowed 9 Legion employees, a lieutenant sergeant, a corporal, and 6 soldiers to spend the night at the Los Galindos farm. They were on duty in Ceuta, an enclave of Spain in northern Morocco, firm where they were sent to Madrid for an important parade. After the parade, the Marquis invited them to stay at his farm. One of the soldiers made a cache of drugs on the farm, but, leaving the farm, forgot to empty it. On the same day, 2 soldiers returned for the contents of the cache, but, according to the Marquis, found that the cache was already empty. Gonzalez probably took its contents to his home in Parados to tell Zapata about it, after which they decided to report everything to the police. Zapata came from Parados to the farm only to talk to the soldiers who began to threaten Gonzalez. The manager began to convince them to get behind their ward, threatening them otherwise to report everything to the police. After these words, the situation escalated. One of them hit Zapata twice from behind. Then the tractor driver was told to ride in the parade and bring drugs, otherwise the consequences would be deplorable. Gonzalez did so and for unknown reasons took his wife back with him. While he was away, the soldiers killed Juana, who could be a potential witness. When Asuncion and Gonzalez returned to Los Galindos with drugs, the soldiers decided to kill them to avoid further problems. They decided to burn 4 bodies, starting with Gonzalez and Asuncion. To make the bodies burn faster, they tried to cut off limbs and heads from them. While doing this, the soldiers noticed a tractor that was driving in the direction of the farm. At the wheel of the tractor was Ramon Parilla, who was driving a barrel of fresh water. Two soldiers took the rifle by the stalemate and hid in the workshop. As soon as Parilla approached the door leading to the workshop, the soldiers shot at him, seriously injuring his hands. After that, Parilla managed to run back to the gate, where the soldiers overtook him. Then they decided to burn down the barn where Gonzales and Asuncion died and get out of the farm as soon as possible. In about 15 minutes, Fennet will return to the farm and find the fire. Neither the judges nor the civil guard believed that the Marquis's version was based on the truth, but nevertheless they checked it. Information was confirmed that Legion employees stayed at the farm. However, it was also confirmed that by the 22nd of July, all 9 people had returned to Ceuta, which denied their involvement in the murders. Despite such a huge hole in this version, the Marquis insisted on his words for many years. The authorities stuck to their official version, according to which all the blame fell on Gonzales, despite the absence of any evidence of his guilt. As a result, many people suffered, especially the Gonzales family. In Paradas, they became outcasts. Gonzales's mother was so intimidated by the locals that she became a hermit for the rest of her life. Even after a second investigation, Parilla's family has always been very close to Gonzales' family. But now a wall of anger and disgust has grown between them. Even Zapata's daughter had to sell the house that her father bought for her in the parade, because it became the target of hooligans who wanted to know about the relationship between her and Gonzales. One of the most heartbreaking moments in this whole story was the adoption of the official version of the Civil Guard by the cemetery of the parade. While on the graves for Juana, Asuncion, and Parral, it was written was killed. Killed on July 22, 1970. Died on the grave on July 20, 1970. They could not forgive these murders. He, in fact, became a victim himself. It lasted 6 years. Up until 1989, when the judge took into his hands all the information about the massacre at Los, contained in 4 pages, and decided to get to the truth of what happened on July 22, 1975. As controversy and debate raged around the Los Galindos Massacre case, more and more people began to take an interest in the case. It was too unusual, and many talked about a mysterious hand in this matter. Whether the Marquis was involved in this case or not, people all over Spain began to doubt the progress of the investigation. Perhaps it was the popular versions that emerged at that time that inspired the writers from Seville, Alphonse Gros, to write in 1978 year his romance Indos. As Grossa himself claimed, this novel was simply an interpretation and a possible version of the events that took place in Los Galindos. According to Gross, much of the information he has gathered comes from rumors he managed to hear in New York. These rumors circulated among certain Sicilian groups. The novel is a fictional description of what could have happened on the farm. In writing style, it resembles the novel The Cold-Blooded Murder of the Writerhood, and offers a fairly reasonable explanation of the events of July 22, 1975 year. Gross suggested that the motive for the murder was the desire of a Moroccan criminal organization to take revenge on the Marquis. This organization profited from the sale of marijuana throughout the Iberian Peninsula. In the novel, the Los Galindos farm is one of the many sources of marijuana, Zapata, being a close friend of the Marquis, knew about it, for which he received his share. In the future, for some reason, there are disagreements between the West and this organization. Tensions are rising. As a result, the organization sends several of its people to the farm to deal with Zapata. The rest of the victims will be those who somehow knew about suspicious transactions. The authorities have also reviewed the version from this book. In the end, it was not far-fetched and could shed light on some gaps in the case. In this case, for example, the murder of women becomes justified. After all, they knew about her husband's connection with drugs. The book also provides an explanation of one of the most important mysteries of the case. Why did Gonzalez bring his wife there? Perhaps he was told that he and his wife were needed for a business meeting. And finally, the book also explains the brutality of the murders so typical of organized crime groups. It was a kind of message to the rest of the business partners who would have decided to do the same as the victims. The civil guard carefully checked the land for traces of marijuana. Nothing of the kind was found, although they understood that after such a long time, any traces could have disappeared long ago. In 1987 year, the Invitados romance was filmed. The film received very low reviews, especially in the town of Paradas, where locals complained about the dissimilar portrayal of their friends and loved ones. In January 1981, the young Roberto Asensio had just been appointed a municipal judge. As a very small city, all legal and judicial issues were within the competence of the courts of Marquina. He didn't follow the development while he was still studying, but now he had access to official documents. Among them was a summary of 1975th year, which are in the category of cases pending consideration. It is appropriate to say a few words about the paradigm of the court that dealt with the Los Galindos case. Asensio will be the fourth judge to handle this case. Judge Victor Fuentes, who later became a judge of the Supreme Court of Spain, was supposed to conduct the Los Galindos case. But at that time he was on vacation, so this case went to the address of Marquez Ronda, a judge of the Echo municipality. The judge learned about the crime personally from Corporal Fernandez, but initially did not want to deal with it. He claimed that the massacre took place outside of his jurisdiction. Nevertheless, during the week until Judge Fuentes returned from vacation, he worked very hard on this case. Fuentes was the same judge who signed the summary with the official version of Gonzalez's guilt. But the case was never closed. In April 1976 year, the work on the case was headed by the third judge, Antonio Marena Andrade. The reason for the change of judges was that Fuentes' resume was withdrawn. Andrade, who was 29 years old at the time, enthusiastically started working on the case. He had never had a case of this magnitude before. He was aware of all the violations that had taken place in the months preceding the start of his work on the case. Therefore, he demanded a complete review of all available evidence. However, for reasons that are not entirely clear, Andrade will close the case in 1978 year, apparently having achieved the same results as Fuentes. And again, all the blame will fall on the tractor driver Gonzalez. When Asensio took over, he was only 25 years old. This case completely absorbed him. He made endless recordings and worked on it day and night. After 600 pages, he had a clear idea. All this time, the truth about the Los Galindos case has been hidden by someone's powerful hands. Personal interests, supposedly happy coincidences, and inexplicable inaction of the authorities were involved here. A lot of information and potential traces leading to criminals have not been investigated for no apparent reason. First of all, no one knew about his more than suspicious behavior on the day of the murders. No one investigated the fact that at the beginning of 1976 year, he divorced his wife. And since then, he has never appeared in Paradas again. And now let us recall that the Marquis acquired this farm as a result of a very profitable marriage, since he himself was ruined at that time. Secondly, Asensio found records and reports of various inquiries regarding Antonio Fanetta, a farm worker, who was the first to arrive in Los Galindos on that tragic day. These notes stated that Fanetta claimed to have seen no one and nothing when he arrived at the farm. Nevertheless, the civil guard discovered that a few days after the murders were committed, someone transferred to Fanetta's bank account the amount of 500,000 scribes, about $40,000, at the current exchange rate. On this occasion, Fanetta could not give a clear explanation. At first, he said that he had received an inheritance. Then he changed his testimony and said that his brother was going to open a restaurant in Parados, and this money was his share for helping to open a case. After all, he called the money his personal savings. Whatever the origin of this money, Asensio was confused when he found out that no one had tried to follow this trail before. Later, during the second interrogation, Fanetta will insist that he did not see anyone at the farm. Although during one of the interviews with a journalist, he will say that the lieutenant of the civil guard forbade him to talk about what he saw that day. Thirdly, the Marquis gave Gonzalez and Asuncion an impressive amount of money after their wedding. This was apparently done at Zapata's request. It is known that the Marquis never made such broad gestures for other farm workers. This moment remained without explanation. Fourthly, and this is the most incredible thing in the whole case, during the 2 years of his investigation, Asensio discovered that the then mayor of Paris in 1976 received an anonymous letter. It was sent from the city of Zaragoza, which is located 600 kilometers northeast of Seville. The letter was sent in February of the same year. The author of the letter, who called himself Juan, wrote, "For what I have done, I deserve a noose." In the letter, the author attached a train ticket to Zaragoza, dated 1975, and also wrote that he had to leave. Juan claimed that he was the killer responsible for the murder of Juana Martin, which he committed on the orders of a third party. He was also ordered to kill the salary, but he could not do it, so this third party intervened. According to this Juan, after a short argument, this man killed Zapata and said, "No one will ever suspect me." Then he saw Parilla, who, according to him, died only because he returned a little earlier. Gonzalez and Asuncion were the last to die at the hands of this man. However, as Huang wrote, they were shot. They are beaten to death. As for Gonzalez's departure from the farm and subsequent return with his wife, the letter explains that the man convinced him that Gonzalez had better do exactly that, otherwise things would get even worse. Huang further clarified that the main target was Zapata. The other three, Juana, Gonzalez, and Asuncion, were to die because of the high probability that they knew about the affairs in which Zapata got involved. However, the letter did not explain exactly what Zapata got involved in. The number of details presented in this letter, most of which were made public at the beginning of 1976, made Asensio believe in the truth of this letter. The young judge traced the location of the letter. He confirmed that Mayor José Gómez Salvago handed over the letter to the Civil Guard Department. However, the trail ends there. Whatever happened to that letter, it never got into the hands of the previous judges. On the cold morning of January 27, 1983, 5 bodies were exhumed for a new forensic examination. Asensio appointed Dr. Luis Frontella as the head of this very examination in 10 years. Frontella would become famous for his participation in the infamous case of the girls from Alcácer. He has always had a reputation as a media man and constantly tried to be in the spotlight of the media, however. He is also an experienced forensic scientist who was educated in the UK at Scotland Yard as well as in the FBI. Frontella and his team conducted an examination for 4 days, and then within 9 months, A 250-page report was developed. By the way, it was then that Asensio received information about Juan's anonymous letter. On October 16, 1983, at a hearing in the courtroom of Seville, Frontello brought to the fore the main provisions of his conclusions. The first one: José González was not the killer, but was the same victim. He died from a blow to the head, inflicted with a blunt object from behind. This was different from the data in Juan's letter, which said that he had been shot. Someone performed a complete amputation of his leg and a partial amputation of the rest of his limbs. Second, at least 2 people were involved in the murders. Judging by the traces of blood and other evidence, one of the criminals was a physically large man with great strength. Third, Manuel Zapata was indeed the first victim. Someone attacked him from behind. This man was taller and was in the place where Zapata's body was found. The killer hit him with incredibly great force. Fourth, Juana Martin was killed by a physically weaker man who attacked her in the living room, where her body fell after being hit on the head. Her killer tried to drag the body to the bedroom. Then he was helped by a larger assistant who killed Zapata. One of them took Juana by the arms, the other by the ankles. So they dragged her at a height of about 50 centimeters from the floor. The traces and the shape of the blood drops in the corridor led Frontel to believe that it was difficult for the physically weaker killer to carry Juana's body, and he even stumbled a little in the corridor. Fifth, the murder weapons of Zapata and Juana were 2 different knitting knots. The knotter that killed Zapata was lying in the bedroom, next to Juana's body. The knotter that killed Juana was lying in the house in another place. Sixth, the fact that Juan was killed in the face after her death can be explained by the fact that the physically weak killer struck with small force. That's why he hit so many times to finish off the manager's wife for sure. Seventh, Asuncion was killed in the bedroom, possibly kneeling in front of Juana's body. The blood from the other bed was hers. This is confirmed by comparing the blood from the bed with the glutenine present in her charred remains. And glutenin is an antibody that causes gluing and precipitation from a homogeneous suspension of bacteria, red blood cells, and other cells carrying antigens. A similar method was used to determine the blood type of Egyptian mummies. Eighth, Parilla was shot right after he entered the workshop. The shooter was standing to his left at some distance from him. The shooter was much taller than Parilla and held the gun on the right side. Parilla, with severe forearm wounds after trying to protect himself from the shot, ran to Zapata's house. After that, a group of forensic experts rejected the idea that Zapata himself was the shooter. Finding the door locked, Juan's body was already inside. He tried to escape from the farm on the way. The shooter chased him until the hover fell to the ground. Then the shooter rested the barrel of the gun against his chest and fired a second time. The ninth. Initially, Parilla was not the target of the assassins. He just returned earlier than expected, thereby becoming an unnecessary witness. The way he was killed shows that, unlike the other 4, it was not planned. Frontella also provided his reconstruction of the sequence of events based on his own conclusions and evidence, as well as rather scant witness testimony. Zapata was killed first, around noon. He was followed and hit from behind with a knitter. After his death, the attacker used a pitchfork to drag his body several meters away, to the place where he was found, covered with hay. Images of the ground where Zapata's body was lying show a pool of blood and other fluids resulting from the decomposition of the body, indicating that Zapata's body did not move until it was found. Zapata's death could have occurred before González sent Fennet and Parilla away from the farm. It remains unclear whether González was aware of Zapata's death at the time. The next victim was Juana Martin. Most likely, she was killed shortly after being sent from Fennet and Parilla's farm. It could also have happened 3 hours later. Her dead body was lying in the same place where she was killed a few minutes before being dragged into the bedroom, where she will be found later. Perilla could have been the third victim, but it is no longer possible to confirm this. However, Frontella stated that he was the last to die. Gonzalez and Asuncion arrived in Los Galindos around 1530. It is very likely that Asuncion came to Zapata's house following the blood trail. The fact that she reached the bedroom by herself indicates that neither the outer door nor the door to the bedroom were locked, which gives reason to assume that she was killed before Perilla. Gonzalez may have entered the house, but there was no evidence of his death. Most likely, he was killed on the street. By the time Perilla returned, the killers had cut up the bodies of Gonzalez and Asuncion with a saw to make the bodies burn faster. Andrade became the judge responsible for the hearing. Asensio was recently appointed to a position in the city of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, which he had been requesting for a long time, before becoming acting in the court of the municipality of Marquina, despite the painstaking work of Frontal and his team. Andrade considered it unnecessary to start a new trial because, according to him, it would not bring any new evidence, but simply gave another hypothesis about what could have happened in Los Galindos. Moreover, there is still at least one serious suspect in this case. With these words, the case of the Los Massacre was closed. The Los Galindos case is frustrating for two reasons. The first one, absence of suspects. No one has ever been arrested for this crime. And the second one, the obvious absence of a motive for the crime. Summing up, we can say the following. Zapata was definitely not a murderer because he was killed first. Gonzalez couldn't have been the killer either. He was physically too weak to pull this off on his own. All the accusations against him have always been dubious, to say the least, and, in the opinion of many, completely absurd. The Marquis' version, although reasonable, had a single but very large hole. All the soldiers of the Legion returned to Ceuta on the day of the murders. Therefore, they could not have committed this crime. There was no evidence that drugs were involved. There were rumors in the parades that Los Galindos was a meeting place for various influential people, where these people discussed the future of the nation after the inevitable death of Francis Franco. His health was already deteriorating at the time of the murders, and he died in November of the same year. However, such a version seemed unlikely. Then why? The judges, police officers, and prosecutors who were involved in this case were in some kind of collusion. All the victims, except Perilla, knew that something was going on at the farm. The generally accepted unofficial version is that the owner of Los Galindos did not report all products to the SENPA service, the Spanish National Agricultural Production Service, to avoid taxes by selling some of its products illegally. It is believed that Zapata knew about this, but was unhappy with this state of affairs, either because of his moral beliefs or because of his low share. Juana knew this because she was Zapata's wife. Asuncion spent a lot of time with the Marquis when he was on the farm, and also communicated closely with Juana. Therefore, it is quite possible that she was aware of the events. It follows that Gonzalez, being Asuncion's husband, also knew about everything. The fact that they received a large sum of money from the Marquis only confirms this hypothesis. At some point, there was a conflict between the West and the Marquis, because the West refused the deal. Perhaps someone tried to make a deal with the Marquis, but received a negative response. After that, it was decided to send a couple of killers to deal with 4 of his confidants in order to teach the Marquis a lesson. By the way, the accounting books of the Los Galindos farm were never found. The hole in this version is that agricultural fraud is not uncommon in Spain. However, such terrible crimes have never happened because of disagreements on this ground. This does not mean that the hypothesis is impossible. It's just unlikely. Besides, the murders seem random and pointless. The Los Galindos Massacre case was officially declared closed in 1988, 20 years later. The statute of limitations on this case expired, which meant that if the perpetrators were found, they could not be brought to justice. By 1990, the public had stopped talking about it at all, and the media pressure had disappeared. In 1986 year, 2 years before Judge A finally closed, he learned about a woman from Marchena who told the civil guard that her deceased husband confessed something to her on his deathbed. He saw something strange on the farm on the day of the murders. This man was the manager of a small farm that was located next door. According to her, he told her that on that day he was patrolling the territory in the hope of finding several poachers who were operating in the vicinity of Los Galindos and his farm. He noticed a man he knew who was running away from Los Galindos. This man, known in Marcine, was wearing camouflage clothing stained with blood. He was holding a large wad of money in his hands. He could be heard muttering, "So much blood, so much death. Just for this." This information has been studied, and the person has been identified. However, he had a solid alibi. At the time of the murders, he was doing military service and was absent from Marceni. Therefore, Andrada could not find anything compromising that person. No one has ever been arrested on suspicion of murder. And now, 45 years later, this case remains unsolved. Judge Asensio, however, managed to do a truly good thing for one of the victims. After the report of Frontel was transmitted to the media, the inscription died on the tombstone of Gala. On the 22nd of July, 1970. The inscription was changed to killed on the 22nd of July, 1975th year. Now he is, without a doubt, the victim of the Los Galindos massacre, so his name has been cleared. I express my gratitude to a user named Alexander for finding this case on the internet, and also indicated an exhaustive number of links to information sources, with which it was possible to get acquainted with this case in more detail. Let's hope that one day the truth will prevail. Emmanuel Zapata, Juana Martin, Jose Gonzalez, Asuncion Pirata, and Ramon Parilla will receive the justice they deserve. And this case will finally be solved. In conclusion, I would like to share with you a drawing that you can stumble upon online information on this case. Its author is unknown. The picture shows the smoke, blood, and only two witnesses that happened on the farm. Two pairs of eyes that probably saw all the evil done that day. But they can't tell us anything to shed light on the all-consuming darkness that has surrounded this case for 45 years. Dead people never find peace. And just look at the identity card of the 5 from Los Galindos. Black and white image. Men in well-pressed white shirts, gray work suits. Their skin is rough from daily hard rural labor. Women with short dark hair under a layer of varnish. They all look away. There is a faint smile on their faces, which after 45 years has turned into torture. They know that the killer will come back again and will not let them rest. The killer who caused them the most pain. His name is impunity. And he comes back every year in July to kill them again and again. And when he leaves Los Galindos farm with bloody hands, each time he leaves behind only the singing of cicadas and the oppressive heat of the Andalusian fields.